Hey, people, I was just joking about that. There's nothing you can do to change my mind. Even God knows that all Israelis are jerks. He says it right here in the Bible, and we're all the souls who were descendants of Jacob. They were all jerks, JRK. And that's not the worst thing he calls them. And we get a better definition of what a jerk is here. His hand under the thigh of Abram, his master. Yeah, you a jerk. You a jerk if you put your hand under the thigh of your master. And the first time I noticed this word, was when Jacob was fighting with the angel and he touched his hip socket. And they called it thigh. I don't know how they got descendants out of it, because they'll call it thigh or loins all the way through here. I believe this is the one we were just looking at it. They changed to loins, but it's thigh or upon the side. And these jerks didn't have a chance. It started with Adam, and Adam lived 30 and 100 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, is to bid him what of the kite's limb to. The kites, K-I-T-S, the kite's limb of. And bid him what to the kite's limb of. A kite, that's a raptor, a large, long-winged bird of prey. And then in Numbers, when Moses is taking a census of all the sons of Israel, by their families, they're all misfit. You see that's the base word of this. It being, in misfits, the misfit of the misfits. Or just plain misfit, M-S-P-H-T, misfit. And I believe that's the spelling that comes up the most times, 81 times, the misfits. And that's why when you see all these old Jewish memes, they got this big old nose, that's the upper part of the beak. They're supposed to look like the kite. So I might be Jewish, because all my father's family had these huge noses. They keep on growing all their life. And they was all French. So the French are probably the real Jews. So in that last movie I was reading here in Isaiah 44, these first 5 lines, the Lord has chosen Israel. And it seemed to be talking about Mercury or the fool or the court jester. And I put that in this folder called Pyador, where I was reading in the Greek before. And in one of those movies, the one that got stamped with the Freemason warning, I was showing where it was talking about in this folly of idolatry, where they were making an image to worship. And it was saying this line 13, the chores of the axum, the lumberjack, stretches out his rule and marks out the chalk and fashions it with a plane and a compass. He formed it with a plane and a compass in the Hebrew, but over in the Greek they interpret this as he formed it with a scraper and a carpenter square. And that was just all hollering about the Masons. In the Hebrew it's a compass, in the Greek they said it was a square. And I was saying, there's only one idol I could think of that you would need a square to form, but I forgot about this one. And it's called a herm, and it kind of looks like a cross there. And I believe these were put up as boundary markers. They said they put them on crossroads. And they'll say at the beginning here, that it was before Hermes. And then they'll say at the end of this that it was named for Hermes. But yeah, you can see that, it's formed square. You would use a square to shape the block and then put the image of a man on it. They say it originated in Greece and was adopted by the Romans and called the Mercury. And you can see that Atlantis had the same figure there. And they were placed at crossings, country borders, and boundaries as protection. Corners of streets, high roads, and signposts with the distance inscribed on them. Hermes was a phallic god associated with fertility, luck, roads, and borders. Name perhaps comes from the word herma, referring to a square rectangular pillar of stone. And, you see that in Genesis 1, the Hermes. They say it's the creepy, crawly things. And they say before this, they would just put pile of stones up and worship a pile of stones. And I don't believe anything they say about any kind of worship. There's always a reason. And it was most likely because they used to put food out at these posts for the poor. And I imagine people started covering the post up with stones because, if you feed them, they will come. And so this is said to be a hermit with the head of Heracles. And I believe that's your old spelling for Hercules. And you can see this is a lion skin he's got on his head, the nose and ear. You see the arms are tied in a square knot. And you see the paws here and the claws on the paws. And this says Aliases. They say yada is to know. And the yod is the hand as. And Philly, that's the word for Jesus in the Trinity, in the oldest Trinity was Philly. Or fill the hand as. Fill your pockets up. And neo, that's new nose. And they say all the noses wore off of these because everybody would come by and rub them. But it's plain to see that was taken off with a hammer. And then, H-R-A-K-L, here, akal, that's the word for eat in the Hebrew, the akal, or Heracles, which it looks like they're missing some letters here. So that's possibly what it said. And then and the A-N-E, and this isn't the O. You see the O is here. The O doesn't have the dot in it. This is, they say, is the ancient letter that represents Mu, and they say it was the A, but when it got to Egypt, it was the R, circle with the dot in it. And I believe it represents an asshole. It's possibly the old Tet, because you already have an R here. But, this is the oldest language. There's a lot of letters, that didn't have a sound. They had a picture meaning, and it could just mean, the point. This could be the ancient, the ought, the dot on top of the I, the point, the place, on the point, on the place. One letter has a whole word meaning. But, Philly, it means the sun. Philiades, the sun knows, new knows. And here it calls, and here eats on the, and then this position, on this point. And so it could be a marker, telling the distance to the city. And that letter, it could be the A, as in what they say in Mu. You think about, all the places that start with an A, all the lands that start with an A, America, Atlantis, Alaska, Africa, Arabia, and that A at the front could just mean, that land. But there's many clues in here that tell that that's what it was talking about in the Hebrew. But yeah, you can see how this would be the only idol that they would need a square to form it and then put a man's image on it. So this was that first word when I started reading this next paragraph. This is the first word that sent me there. And I read this two different ways. I read it with the top markings I usually do. And this also reads, with just the letters, as in, they say the first time this was written, there was no vowel points. It wasn't block style. It was just the old letters. But with the vowel points in the markings, reading the upper markings, this reads cocoa, just that one letter and those three dots. Tell me that reads C-O-C-U-E-H, and then backwards a R, the cocoharm. And, that's where you word coconut and Coca-Cola, and it's the ancient word for a head is a coca. And that's where coconut come from, it looked like a head. And that made me look up into that, the cocoharm. And then amber, they say, is the word, and then come back and get the MR again. The coca harm Marie have. The head harm high Marie. The coca harma, the head of Hermes, and then MR high and Marie have. And I believe they got this word for says and king backwards. I believe this more says the king over here. The myrrh is the high power from the head, the top power. And they say that's Homer, means the command. And the milk, is M from the tongue give. So that milk is more like spit. Spit is language. And it looks like they got the word for king and word backwards. This is the command, and this is from the tongue give, from the word. But this cocoa, it's the ancient word for the boogeyman. But this is old cocoa with the many spellings. Cocoa, coca. And it was the ancient Santa Claus and the boogeyman, to keep your kids acting right. The coco's always watching. He knows when you've been bad and good. And he only comes and eats the bad kids, And this was one of Picasso's favorite subjects. He has several paintings of the coca harm. And if you study those writings, you'll see there's many different ways. Sometimes it was just a man on a roof, and it was all different kind of beast. And sometimes it was an owl or any type of bird of prey on the roof. It could be male or female or a monster. And his job was to make disobedient children disappear. So the coca could mean the head or skull. It was sometimes a humanoid alligator. That would be the one waiting to eat your heart in the Egyptian weighing of the heart. The second death. Sometimes represented as a dragon-headed armadillo with spines, a dragon-headed snapping turtle. And this old coca is also could be the jack-o'-lantern, which they say if you look up jack-o'-lantern that's just like a new invention of the Americas almost. They can't find any history of that. And it looks like this celebration goes on around the Day of the Dead. But this is a huge page. They got much about this. And I believe the oldest writings they have of it were back in the 13th century. But I found them a little bit older here. The coca harm. So this is 3 long lines. And, it really tells off, If somebody's hollering that I'm the first and the last, and beside me there is no God, he is from bloody anal of him. Well, that show is bloody anal of him to think he's the first and last and the only. Yeah. If you're just reading the letters, ignore all the points. That's why they said it was written originally, and from the bloody anal. The anal of him. And so it's talking about the same thing it was talking about in the Greek. The bloody anal to boofing drugs. Who guide to York. That's where your word New York come from. And they used to say it means the keeper. The guide to keeper. And all, not do fear nor is all, that same word is God most of the time. And all to pedo, P-H-D-U, is pedo in the Greek, that's the children. And when you're reading it with the marks, then it turns to all adapt, A-U-D-H-P-T, adapt. And all adapt the children to fear. That's why they had to change it, from the cocoa to the Santa Claus. Instead of keeping the kids afraid of all the time, they had to reward them for being good instead of just trying to keep them in fear that they were going to get eaten by cocoa. It says it again, my witness is there, a God beside me, and indeed no other is, from bloody vein, the X swear, the cross swear, volet to, ditto, D-I-D-O, the same T. And that T-A-Y, that's your ancient English word for tea. And that's what it's talking about, drinking the blood. And from the bloody vein, the plants swear the violet to ditto tea. And so that's going to be my next movie. I'm gonna start reading this at 6 and get on into this Hebrew where it's talking about the creation of this false idol and this image and what it's talking about here. But I'm gonna cut this off here. Good day.